episode of Marginal, which is a politics and current events student-run podcast. I have four other co-hosts here with me.
Alright, I'm Luke and I'll be talking about Trump's tariffs.
I'm Alfie and today we're going to be covering welfare reforms.
And I'm Barney and I'm talking about the Whitehall reforms.
It's just an introductory week, so hopefully next week we'll have other students, maybe teachers. So then, without further ado, let's get started.
Okay.
So, Project Chainsaw is the unofficial name given to Keir Starmer's radical plan to streamline the British state by cutting bureaucracy, reducing the influence of non-government organisations and reforming public services. So, this is one of the most striking reforms from Keir Starmer, abolishing a body that oversees the National Health Service. So instead, the functions of this body will be absorbed into the Department of Health and Social Care. This move is intended to streamline the healthcare administration by cutting down on bureaucratic layers and directing resources to frontline services. So the pros of this: you're eliminating an overseeing body, so you're cutting down on bureaucracy, decision making will become more direct, and this will just reduce any delays, administrative delays.
Keir Starmer said that the result would end the duplication of two organisations doing the same job. This, will free up staff to focus on patients and more resources on the front line. This reform can suggest that it's up to 10,000 positions could be affected because of this. For any confusion, Starmer's not getting rid of the NHS.
NHS
It's purely just a non-departmental public body, and it was only actually formed in 2013 anyways.
It's alright, I'm going to get to the cons of this decision. So by eliminating a non-governmental organisation, you're allowing the NHS to become more vulnerable to political interference. Government interference is also never a good thing. It's red tape, it's bureaucracy. This will cause a major structural change leading to confusion. It can lead to job losses and operational inefficiencies. And also, if you go back to when David Cameron was Prime Minister, his restructuring the NHS actually ended up costing more than it was intended to save. So, could Project Chainsaw actually fail?
Yeah, there was actually many reforms that are actually very similar to Keir Starmer's done by David Cameron already, and to be honest, they didn't go particularly well, as they start to show. But yeah.
Well, I do think this Project Chainsaw will be quite good in dealing with inefficiency within the NHS.
Yeah.
And it ended up actually making the NHS more inefficient because I think maybe a centralised power controlling the NHS might actually be quite advantageous, but we get to see.
So also, the last point is removing independent bodies. It's never good. You're centralising power. That's socialism. It's not a good thing.
So we had a bit of a technical issue, lost a bit of footage. So first of all, he's scrapping the current process of the work capability assessment, which used to determine how people would get benefits, and will be replaced by a single assessment. So what that assessment determines is whether people should get paid for the personal independent payment, which is a benefit which is designed to help individuals with their cost of their long-term conditions with illness and disabilities, and how it can cause them to be out of work, really. The benefit is not means tested, meaning that depending on your disability is how it gets paid out and is not affected by your incomes. The eligibility will therefore be tightened, but alongside this, the government are going to resource money into providing people with support into getting back into jobs from their long-term illnesses and disabilities. It means, so the government have predicted that this will save them £5 billion by 2030, and it shows a shift of focus from giving people money to trying to get them back into work and a smaller welfare state. So this policy could lead to long-term benefits in the labour supply and the efficiency of the labour market, and it will be much harder to wrongly claim benefits. However, a study done by the Disability Policy Centre said savings could be as low as 2%. This is all down to the huge cost of court appeals, because there's going to be far more appeals and the government are going to have to pay those fees. So this was pretty much calculated from David Cameron's attempts on reforming this, where 70% of appeals were successful, and 100 Labour MPs this week have briefed with Liz Kendall, who is the Welfare and Pensions Minister, meaning that the chances of a huge rebellion within the party might be increasing, as it's against Labour manifesto and all of that.
Yeah, it's like it's a betrayal of some of the Labour voters.
Yeah.
Who Labour associated with welfareism, old Labour policies.
Yeah.
That's
strong welfare states.
Yeah.
I think that can also be seen through the success in the Green Party as well in the July elections.
Keir Starmer has introduced his Whitehall reforms, and so I'll start off by describing what Whitehall actually means. So it's both a positional and a general term to describe the UK government. It's positional in the fact that it's actually the street that houses the central government buildings and infrastructure, but it's also used metaphorically to describe the UK government and the wider civil service as a whole. And so we can kind of say that the government and Whitehall in this scenario is kind of interchangeable. And so I'll just start with a rough description. These are reforms to Whitehall, to the government, to civil service and to the local governments and constituencies. And it's mainly meant to, like the welfare reforms, cut down on wasted spending. It ties into the government's manifesto of cutting the fiscal deficit, and Labour is really trying to cut down on wasted expenditure.
I think a lot of this is like, there's a lot of raising of revenue in the budget from Rachel Reeves, as controversial as it may be. But now all these reforms are looking at cutting spending. So
yeah, and Labour's going to do this by doing two things, primarily. Firstly, the suspension of government procurement cards. So you can think of these as kind of like credit cards, just for civil servants. They're called GPCs. And the government plans to suspend nearly half of the 20,000 GPCs to come down to 10,000, which are currently used by Whitehall officials.
Yeah, they spend on useless things.
So since 2019, from 2019 to 2024, expenditures have risen to 676 million, covering things such as flights, office furniture, official functions, just I think things which the Labour government would see as not really efficient. They're also planning,
money.
yeah, exactly. Finally, they're planning to do some real-time monitoring of departmental spending. They're going to cut down spending. They're going to introduce a monitoring system to make sure that everything's sufficient. And on top of that, we're going to devolve powers from Whitehall to local constituencies, and all the
well, there will be a big focus on the impact of tariffs in the UK. As I'm sure you've all heard, Donald Trump has been raving on about his tariffs, and he professes his love for them at some time. Trump's done this to protect US industries such as steel, manufacturing, agriculture. He thinks that this is because of unfair competition, especially from China, Mexico and Canada. We've seen this happen before in Trump's first term, where he placed heavy tariffs on Chinese washing machines. So the thought process behind this is that by making these imported goods more expensive, you're encouraging people to buy from domestic products, because
America first.
yeah, exactly. All of that ties into this slogan that Trump uses. He's long criticised this trade deficit between Canada and Mexico, or China and Mexico too. There are some potential negatives for these tariffs, as economists note that they can potentially reduce the US GDP to
in the short term,
as much as 0.64%, and it's similar as well with Canada. Their economy can really be hit hard by this, given that 75% of its exports go to the US. The value of the UK's raw steel and aluminium exports to the US in 2024 was around £470 million. This might not sound like a lot, and to be honest, it isn't. It's important to note that the latest US tariffs, though, also cover products made from these products, such as gym equipment, furniture and machinery.
Yeah.
It's estimated by Global Trade Alert think tank that the UK's exports of these products to the US in 2024 is around £2.2 billion. This is, it's quite a small figure to be honest, given that the UK exports around £58 billion of goods to the US on an annual basis, which we see in 2024. So it's just 5% of UK exports will be hit by these tariffs.
I think a lot of the things which use steel is fundamental to really doing anything. Really, building machines, building bridges, infrastructure, everything. So I think that these tariffs really could slow down all of that production.
Consumer and producer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. Do you want to move on to questions now?
Yeah.
So we had a poll for a Q&A. So the first person we're going to go to is Oliver Mail.
Thank you, Matt.
Well done for winning your spot on this Q&A.
The first ever Q&A of Marginal Games podcast.
And the first winner, Oliver Mail.
Oliver.
Biggest crash out in politics was his question. Who had the biggest crash out?
Alright, so I'll take this first.
We'll go with
Vanilla choice. John Prescott. I mean, it's probably the most famous one.
classic.
An assailant threw an egg at him.
And
And he actually went and punched him right in the face. And this didn't actually harm his career at all.
Yep.
He actually surged in popularity, and Tony Blair came on a few days later and said, that's just John in his presidency.
I'm going to go more recent. Aaron's obviously gone for a more retro event. Recently, I'm sure you've all heard Mike Amesbury, the disgraced Labour MP. I'm sure you might have seen a video as well of him basically assaulting one of his constituents. I don't know what was said, but I assume it was probably some sort of criticism.
There's possibly like an argument over a taxi. He couldn't find his taxi, and maybe there was some criticism going on. And
You put that as your biggest crash out.
yeah, that was also mine. So 2 o'clock in the morning, possibly a long night of drinking, and
Let's go on to
Quite
Marginal.
silent. So I've gone biggest crash out politics. I've gone for Donald Trump. I think he's vindictive, belligerent, and that was best seen in his debate, quite frankly, appalling debate with Volodymyr Zelensky, where he accused him of being a dictator, not directly, but
I thought I probably prefer JD Vance's crash out to Donald Trump's crash out though.
I mean, it's more unreasonable.
They're
They're both completely
It
unreasonable.
just felt really easy to watch.
Yeah. Ollie Bentley with the last question. Favourite quote by a politician?
So my favourite quote by a politician comes from Winston Churchill, is if you're a socialist, if you're not a socialist by the age of 20, you have no heart. If you're still a socialist by the age of 40, you have no brain. I'm not going to bother explaining that, you guys make your own inferences.
Aaron, the voice of neutrality there.
And guys, make sure in the comments to say your favourite quote.
So, I'm going to go for one by George W. Bush, which is, more and more of our imports are coming from overseas. I just think this is a really insightful comment,
I think George Bush has got a load of classics.
Yeah, he does as well, yeah. Rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? Great grammar there. There's honestly just endless, we'll get into them in the future.
So my one came from the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. So mine was, the problem of socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. Really shows how socialism is unsustainable and taking from the more productive members in society. May not want businesses and people to stay there, that will fuel projects, and that'll cause diminishing tax, they won't be able to do their own thing, and
It's true for like any individualism in a society.
yeah, but that is pure socialism, I suppose, in which
I mean, that's what he's in for.
Barney,
Yeah.
let's
So guys, I didn't actually get a quote, but if I did have a quote, it would probably be myself saying the podcast is over. Thanks for watching, and are there any more comments?
No.
Tune in for the next episode, which will either be 2 to 3 weeks. Hopefully, we're going to have an external speaker, whether a student or maybe teachers. I need to get.
And we appreciate your questions, thank you.